So hello everybody and welcome to our Brexit webinar, BIA Brexit webinar for May 2019. It's Steve Bates at the BIA and we're joined by Laura Collister. And if you're a tracker of these things, we're 168 days until the new deadline of the 31st of October, or if transition is going to happen, 595 days away from that. What we're going to cover today is where we're at today, what's happened with the extension deals, a little bit on UK politics, particularly the European elections, look at what the implications of the European elections mean in Europe, and then what we're doing. I think if I was to summarise what's happened since our last webinar, where much of this was on option for you, and these remain on our YouTube channel, what's happened since our last webinar is not very much. If I'm honest, there's been parliamentary holidays, and despite Tusk saying do not waste this time, there's not been a great deal of developments. But we'll take you through what there has been and set the context, I think, for the coming months. And as you know, I always make sure that people have the opportunity to remember that the UK remains the world's third global cluster in life sciences, with great universities, world leadership in cell and gene therapies, genomics and AI, great funding happening, and a great set of companies generating more than 30 billion of exports as we go forward. And on Brexit, we're still arguing for the same old stuff that everybody knows: a formal relationship with the European Medicines Agency after exit day and frictionless borders, so that patients can get continued supply of medicine, that we have a safe, rapid and effective patient safety and public health systems, including pandemic responses, both sides, that patients can get access to the latest medical treatments at launch, via clinical trials and through R&D of new medicines, that we want to avoid duplication of red tape and with a harmonisation of as many rules as we can possible, and that we want the UK life science industry to grow. Also important within that, of course, is the movement of people that need to maintain brain circulation, experts coming to and from. We're a global sector, we benefit from global insight, and we want low barriers to make that possible, both within academia and crucially for businesses. And we see benefits for R&D and funding through a continued engagement with the European network, which has been so important for our academic colleagues, and also with the European Investment Fund, the European Investment Bank, in terms of the excellent returns they've seen from investment in life science companies in the UK. So whilst some things change, some things stay the same, and as you know, these have been our positions adopted at the behest of members really since the referendum, and we see no reason as of today to change any of them. So where are we? If you were with us last month, you'll remember that this had happened, I think, on the day of our last webinar. The European Council, this is the formal European Council conclusion, which had stated that there was going to be an extension for the ratification of the withdrawal agreement, letter to the UK, and this could be no longer than the 31st of October. And if the withdrawal agreement is ratified by both parties before this date, the withdrawal will take place on the first day of the month of the following month. But of course, it said that the UK must hold elections, and if it failed to live up to this obligation, the withdrawal will take place on the 1st of June. As you can see, as we'll talk about, the UK is well down the track of taking part in those European elections. So I think that probably has fallen, but this is a reminder of the formal text. And the European Council will remain seized of the matter and will review progress at its meeting in June, which is a few weeks away, 20th and 21st of June. So formally, when could the UK leave the EU with a deal? Technically, on the 16th of May, as we look at it, it could do it on the 1st of June, the 1st of July. The last date UK could leave without UK MEPs taking their seats in the European Parliament, the 1st of August, the 1st of September, the 1st of October, or potentially the 1st of October or later if there was a further extension agreed. So we're running down the road of these dates. I think the first two are extremely unlikely. I think many of them are pretty unlikely. But we have this in our minds, and we are obviously cognizant of it, depending on political process. Doesn't seem to be much development in the political process in a meaningful sense at the moment, so I think they remain on the table. So if you like, 5 dates before Halloween, when the UK could leave with a deal, and the date of Halloween as a date when the UK could leave without a deal, or there could be a further discussion and a further extension. Who knows? I'm going to hand over to Laura to give us a sense as to what's going on in terms of the UK update. Laura.
Thank you. So you've seen this slide quite a few times before. This is a diagram that the BBC did a couple of years ago. We're stuck on the purple circle. Still need, following the extension, still no agreement, therefore we're still there. You'll see this week that there's been government has said that they'll try again to get the withdrawal agreement through Parliament the week of the 3rd of June. That's quite a busy week in the UK because it's when Trump is here for the 75th anniversary of D-Day landings. The vote will go ahead at the moment, even if there is no deal between the Labour and Conservative parties. This morning there had been some press reports that Labour wouldn't vote, but this afternoon they have said that they will vote against it unless there is a deal. The other day there was some media discussions saying that Number 10 was saying that if the vote isn't passed, the choice will be between a no-deal Brexit or revoking Article 50. And then also, nice fact that came up on the Parliament website the other day, that the current parliamentary session is now the longest session by sitting days since the English Civil War. And as of Friday, the 10th of May, it had run for 298 sitting days, or over 2,500 hours, of which I guess most of it must have been discussion about Brexit. Going back into those deal negotiations a bit more, obviously they've been going on for quite a long time. There were some press reports about the Brexit negotiator Ollie Robbins, who's a civil servant, going to Brussels to ask about the timing of potential changes to political declaration. It's the declaration which sets out the broad parameters for what the future relationship between the UK and EU could look like and forms the basis for those negotiations. And this article on the right, which I think came from The Sun, talks about it's around the customs union, but there isn't any formal confirmation that it was around that. And the Labour Party also appears to be quite split over whether there needs to be a referendum on the final deal, with different people coming out saying different things. The Conservative Brexiteer, the Brexiteer Party, the Conservative Party also want the Prime Minister to stop the negotiations. Their focus is around the Labour Party ask for a customs union, and there are also Labour Party concerns that the change in the Conservative leadership, which will happen, could impact the implementation of the deal. Equally, if there is a deal, MPs on both sides have sort of raised a lot of concerns. So there's also this question of, if the Conservatives and Labour got a deal, would it make it through Parliament?
Laura, thanks for that. I think my take on this is, if you think about it, when the extension was agreed by the European Union, in a sense, the question to the UK was, go back and do your homework, do two things. You'll have to take part in the European elections, and that might force a democratic moment or a thought process amongst the UK electorate. And you'll also see if you can do a deal cross-party like many European parliaments do. The doing a deal cross-party doesn't seem to be going very well and doesn't seem to be producing a breakthrough or a consensus. Although I do think that in our area, in life sciences, I'm getting indications that there is broad consensus in our space, particularly around the need for continued close cooperation, engagement, rapporteurships at the Medicines Agency, and potentially, if a deal was to be done, I believe that there would be a good chance of consensus across parties in things that might be important for our sector. However, that doesn't mean to say that I think that that is going to be likely, or it would get through Parliament if it was. But if you think about it from a European's perspective, the UK has gone away to do its homework. It's failing pretty fundamentally on coming up with a cross-party deal as we sit and speak today on the Thursday the 16th. And the European elections, which I imagine the European Union hoped, or the EU27 hoped, might bring a consensus position in the UK, doesn't seem to be showing that from the polling that you've seen, Laura.
No. If I move on to the next one, here's a few graphics I took the other day. Obviously, this isn't a traditional look at where the parties are. Some stats down on the left show from CapEx show that 2017 election, 84% of the population voted for a combination of Labour and Conservatives. At the moment, if it all goes as the polls are currently showing, it will be down to 48%. And I know traditionally other parties have done better in European elections, but that is a big differential just in the space of 2 years. So I'm sure you've probably seen in all the newspapers, the Brexit Party doing incredibly well. Change UK, or who were the independent group, are losing their momentum a little bit, and the Conservatives are down in fifth place at the moment in terms of voting intention. The tracker on the right sort of shows the downward trajectory of the Conservatives, which pretty much is the opposite mirror of the Brexit Party. In terms of just running through where some of the parties are this morning, obviously the pressure on Theresa May continues to step down on name a date, and members are looking at alternative ways to put the pressure on to create a leadership challenge if need be. They're unable to hold another official challenge until December because they did a previous official challenge of no confidence, which goes via the 1922 committee in December last year, which means that they can't do it for another year. Theresa May went to meet some of the senior officials, senior members of the 1922 committee this morning, who are encouraging her to set a date. There was discussion in some of the papers around a no confidence vote move on the 12th of June. And after the meeting this morning, the Prime Minister has said that she will make a decision on the date after the vote. There's also obviously lots of MPs, Conservative MPs, who are thinking of themselves as potential leaders and looking for support. Esther McVey came out a week or so ago to join the leadership race, and then today, when asked, Boris said, "Of course, I'm going for it." So there will be an awful lot of Conservatives seeking that leadership. I think there's been some discussion about possible dream teams between two members of, or former members of the cabinets, but I think as soon as that date gets announced, we'll expect a lot more clarity from there. In terms of Labour, quite a short slide here. They're very split on the second referendum. They're looking at focusing on other issues, so water nationalisation today is their key focus. They have a manifesto for the European elections. It's very similar to their UK manifesto, no focus on our sector in it. In terms of the Liberal Democrats, obviously they are suddenly becoming much more resurgent on their platform of stopping Brexit. Had initially looked like the independent group or Change may take away from that, but the Lib Dems appear to be, the polls are showing them doing very well. Their European election manifesto talks about research, treatment, our sector, etc. So, and the need, how being part of the EU means we get new medicines within the UK and bloc quicker than those not in the EU. In terms of Change UK, it's now an official political party. They weren't able to stand in the local elections, but now they are a party. But they do, as I was saying before, appear to be losing some ground potentially to the Lib Dems. Their MEP candidates are drawn mostly from Conservatives and the Labour Party. Former Conservative Health Secretary Stephen Dorrell's there, some former Labour MPs are also there, and some former Labour Party advisors. Their key policy document is called a Charter for Remain. Picks up quite a few quite specific issues around our sector. Highlights the loss of expertise and opportunity by the departure of the EMA, and it states, this is taken directly from the document, says that the Change UK MEPs will vote for the UK to be reinstated around the table as full decision makers in the EMA, and fight to hold the UK government to account for ignoring the vote of Parliament to make it a negotiating objective for the UK to continue to participate in the European Medicines Regulatory Network. Brexit Party, also now an official political party. No policy documents on their website. I think very much a one-issue party, and as you saw from the pictures of the polls, drawing an awful lot of support from the Conservatives, but I think sort of also picking up some votes from other parties.
Thanks, Laura. And I think if you look at the live list, I think it does show that having a consistent industry message means that political parties who are interested in policy detail have seen the consistent position we've held and been able to reflect that in some of their policy manifestos. If you think about it, our position is not only in the political declaration, reflected in some of the work that's gone through Parliament, some of the bills that are through Parliament. It's interesting to see them, see it appear in the detailed positions of some of the parties that are interested in the detail in our sector. And I look forward to a detailed policy from the Brexit Party on what they would do with regards to continued close cooperation or perhaps an alternative view. It's difficult to assess their position with regard to our sector because I don't think they've gone into any detail on what this would mean. If you look at the local elections last time around, that's happened in the last within the last month, I think you can see that the hemorrhaging of support from both the Conservatives and Labour suggests that there is an ongoing frustration from the public about the situation at Westminster. The vote here split in several different places. The UK Independence Party went down, but was a repository of the Brexit vote last time around. But the Brexit Party hadn't got into gear by then. And interestingly, the pro-Remain vote seemed to go Liberal Democrat and Green, which was interesting. Changing gear a little and looking at some of the agencies that matter to us. Ian Hudson, the Chief Executive of the MHRA, is retiring this year. That's policy that's been announced for some time. We've seen other developments with other senior leaders in the MHRA announcing plans to leave. The MHRA has no longer is in charge of any rapporteurships at the EMA, and the government is now planning to support the MHRA's capability, which I think is a very good thing, with some government grant. But how that will work in the longer term, I think, is unknown. The day one readiness guidance for no deal, which we'd spent some time on talking about in previous months, we've not done much focus on this in a sense. We know that there's still some outstanding documentation and questions on that, but broadly we're putting that to one side in the last month and focused on some other issues. But it remains as a block of work ready to go if we need to. And that links to really to why we've deprioritised it. If you look at the no deal planning, people who've been involved in no deal planning will have received this communication from Steve Oldfield, who is leading the Department of Health plan on contingency for no deal continuation of supply. And we're getting clear indications from him that 31st of October is the only date on which no deal exit could happen. And they are asking us for no deal measures to remain in place, stockpiles, additional buffer stocks, until further guidance is available. And I know that they are keen to provide further guidance at the earliest possible opportunity. I think it's unlikely that we'll see that until the end of June at the earliest. But we are keen that they get from across government a clear view as to what they do require industry to do. I've been very clear with government that maintaining readiness at the state of supply that we were asked to for a continued period of time is very, very difficult. I think the government acknowledged that. They also acknowledged that they've marched everybody up to the top of the hill with the dates in around Easter in March and April, and therefore any planning takes place in a new context if that plan was to come out. I think the flip side of this is also that we we are further down the track in terms of having the bones of the plan than we were having to do it de novo, because we have done most of the thinking at least. So what should we do? Perhaps expect further holding communication. We'll continue to work with government, and I think by the summer we hope that if it's an option that's on the table, we'll begin communication again. Perhaps this is a moment for reflection. If there's anything that that we've learned from the past few months that we need to take learnings from, I think the government, the Department of Health, are in listening mode. What went well? What could they improve? What else needs to be done next time round? Quick email to Laura might be an effective way of doing it. And we're seeing from some of the freedom of information requests that have come out that no deal Brexit would be very, very difficult for the NHS in terms of their thinking of a few months ago. Laura, why don't you tell us what's going on from the EU perspective?
Yep, sure. So obviously the flip side of European elections is in the UK is that there's also European elections across Europe. So looking at the polls, which obviously aren't always right, this is what it's showing at the moment. So increased support for the alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe, of which the UK's Liberal Democrats are members of. Some losses for the European People's Party, though that is still likely to remain the largest group as long as all the members of that group remain in that group. There will be some gains for some of the Eurosceptic and anti-European parties, but they're not an official European group because their views are quite disparate. If they were to come together, they might be a substantial group if the polls are correct and the anticipated numbers that the polls are saying come back to Parliament. So what does this mean? Well, we're thinking about what does this mean for the future of negotiation? How does the makeup of the new party potentially impact both how the UK leaves the EU and how a future relationship might be negotiated? Also, at the same time, there needs to be a new commission. There's an informal meeting of the European Council on the 28th of May that will look at the procedures for getting those new EU commissioners in place. And Donald Tusk said today his intention is to carry out an election of heads of EU institutions in a swift, smooth and effective manner. He also talked about the need for broad representation across all the members in all the commissioner roles.
Shall I talk to this? So yeah. It was interesting to see in the European Medicines Agency annual report, Guido Razzi's summary at the beginning, looking back on 2018 with mixed feelings. I think we would all share that. I think I'll just read his words. There's no escaping that these cutbacks have hampered, at least in the short term, the ability of this agency to keep abreast of scientific and regulatory developments and to support the research and development of medicines in Europe. In a sense, I think we all agree that the denial of UK expertise to the European network has not been a positive force, and in the global scheme of things, having an agency unable to keep abreast with scientific and regulatory developments, support the research and development of medicines in Europe is not in the interest of anybody's So interesting to see that reflected by Guido, and I look forward to discussing further with him at Bio in the first week of June. Maybe I can just reflect a little on what we're doing and what our focus is at the moment. So obviously on no deal planning and contingency has taken up much of the time in the first half of this year. I think we're seeking clarity and communication from government about what their ask from us is, so that we can get ready for any potential October deadline. And we're continuing to engage with the MHRA about what the rules might be under that scenario. We've got to be ready for all outcomes, and although I think it's unlikely that we will see an early deal, it would lead to a new phase of operation and new discussion, but I don't think we're there yet. And we're ready, if there's no deal, to make sure that people have understood the nature of the evidence that we've put and worked very hard to avoid. I suppose our focus a little is we think that there is a strong case for regulatory cooperation for UK to play a full part in the European network. Why medicines are different from other types of regulation. All regulation has its own heritage, its own own formation, its different pedigree and different structure. And I think what's increasingly clear to us is that making the case sector by sector is important. We've seen that at the last minute before no deal, different sort of sticking patches were organised in different parts of the both life science sector, devices different from medicines, and between sectors, sticking patches were different. It's quite important to get into the detail of this, and I think explaining the benefits and the practical ways in which some of these cooperations could take place is where we're going. And that's what taking us really to a Brussels focus as the new European Parliament forms and as the Commission comes together, laying some groundwork over the next period of time is where we'll put a degree of our focus, whilst at the same time being cognizant that there's going to be a changing Conservative leadership at some point in the UK, and watching and engaging with the forces involved in that, and helping them explain why harmonisation of rules and regulations is business friendly, why divergence and new red tape barriers isn't something that a right of centre party might be wanting to impose on not one of its most vibrant sectors is part of the discourse and narrative we'll be keen to make sure that people understand. Equally, we'll be keeping going with our sector engagement. If you've come to our lead networks, I think we have another one in the summer. Webinars, we'll do another one in June. Our website is where we're putting together all of our info, and thank you for the feedback on finding that useful. As OLS go around and seek the views of companies, we're trying to make sure that if you want to get engaged, you can get engaged in those. We've had good relationships with the ministerial engagements. They continue very well under the chairmanship of Nicola Blackwood for the government. That's going effectively and continuing to roll. We're working with the MHRA on developments and thinking there. And as Parliament comes back, we're trying to make sure that the details that's ahead of them is understand our issues. So on European elections, MEPs will be in Brussels and Strasbourg across the summer. We're thinking of engaging with the new crop of UK MEPs as they arrive, making sure they understand the detail, what we care about. If people are meeting MEP candidates locally or would like the BIA briefing or engage with those elections or bump into them after the election, Laura has a briefing, and we'd be keen to understand what meetings you've had. European Biotech Week is in September, and we're thinking about whether it makes sense for us to engage with that a little more fully this year. BIA Brexit.org website, we used to call it a microsite. We've now got rid of the word micro because it seems to have megaed, is there, and if there's briefings or things, you may find that useful. So where are we at as we on the 16th of May? Well, I think the important things this week, lots of Europe around. Eurovision is on Saturday in Israel, so we look out to see what that means for the future of Europe. Always a good way of getting a sense of where people are at. Then there's European elections, which will set the tone for the next stage, both in terms of the groupings we see in the European Parliament, and I think the nature of impact that will have on the UK context, UK debate about Brexit. Of course, the big one, 1st of June, Liverpool v Spurs for the European champions. If you're American, this is, of course, the key soccer game in Europe, where two clubs from the country that's trying to leave the EU are seeking to be European champions, managed by a German and an Argentinian. And then, of course, when we come back, week commencing the 3rd, with whoever's got the trophy, the PM will continue to try and get the deal through Parliament. That's the week of Bio, and I think we'll see we'll have an interesting time in the first half of June ahead of the European Council on the 20th, 21st of June, where probably some decisions need to have been made. We'll keep going. Sorry there hasn't been many jokes this time round. we'll keep doing great science. We continue to collaborate. We want regulatory cooperation, frictionless trade, movement of people, and R&D collaboration. We hope you found this useful and enjoyable. And our next webinar is at the close of the European Council on the 21st of June, midsummer. And because it's midsummer, we're going to do it in the middle of the day, 1 p.m. UK time, which I know is bright and early for people in the US. So it'll be 8 a.m. Eastern time. We're moving it up because we want to make sure that with the opportunity to do that. So we'll be on earlier on the 21st of June. If people have got questions, I'm very happy to take a question or two. Don't ask me who's going to win Eurovision or the football, or the outcome of the European election, or what's going to happen in Westminster. Well, I don't know the answer to any of those, and you're not asking me any. I think we shall move on. And thank you. We shall say that what have we got coming up? Upcoming events. So we've Women in Biotech event at the Bio Escalator in Oxford. The first time we're taking Women in Biotech outside of London, so that's really exciting for us. And then we're up at Audley Park in the Northwest on the 18th of June. Next one of these in 21st, and the CEO Investor Forum on the 24th, 25th. 23rd of July is the ABPI BIA Brexit Lead Network. So if you're not on holiday, I'm told Thomas Cook seats are cheap this month because people have had Brexit nerves and therefore not booking their summer holidays. You may be around for the Brexit Lead Network then, and we've booked them in for September and October. So again, another one in September. Stevenage, we may see you in Stevenage in September. Our REG conference, I think, will be interesting this year on the 17th of September. Good discussion there with senior figures from the MHRA around what the implications of where we're at means for our sector. So a good one to be at the diary. And our main autumn conference, October the 17th, Bioscience Forum in County Hall. If you're not a member and want to join, John Cudlick would be delighted to hear from you, and we can talk about not just how we influence, but how we connect people together and save you money. I've already told you we're on early on Friday the 21st of June. With that, I'm going to say thank you and hope you have a great month.